Hello and welcome back to the next episode of Green Shift. We have with us our climate and sustainability expert, Mr. M Ramesh, who's also consulting editor for BusinessLine. Welcome back to the show, Ramesh. Lovely to have you as always.
Thank you, Bharat. As always, happy to be here.
In the last episode, we discussed the Indian government's efforts towards re-energizing the solar energy manufacturing ecosystem in the country. We discussed the price that India would pay if we were to go in entirely for local manufacturing as opposed to importing from China. If we didn't import from China, that would be an opportunity lost to save immensely, and these savings would run into several lakhs of crores if we opted to import from China. And in this episode, we continue with the same topic. Why is that? Because the last episode saw a lot of engagement from you readers, and many were extremely passionate advocating for Atmanirbhar Bharta. All the comments were well meant. Two underlying themes stood out for us from across these comments. One, it is important to encourage local manufacture so that there would be economic value addition in the country. And two, it is high time India weaned itself away from dependence on China. Here are a few of these comments. So Ramesh, we saw those few comments on our screen. What do you make of them?
Well, you see, quite obviously, as you pointed out, the comments were well meant. To my mind, what they illustrate is that Indians are willing to pay a price, even if a heavy price and even if only a notional price, for future good of the country. Now, that's an admirable sentiment, and I'm sure the government will feel very encouraged about it. However, it also appears that most people misunderstood us. People thought that we were favoring continued imports from China. That's not what we meant, that's not what we wanted at all, as we'll explain further in this video.
And that leads me on to my next question. In this episode, as we saw from the comments and as I mentioned in the intro, two underlying themes seem to dominate the passions. One is that there should be local manufacturing encouraged in India so that there's economic value add inside the country.
Yes.
And two, weaning ourselves away from dependence on China.
Yeah.
Please share your thoughts with us on these 2 points, because in the last episode we've discussed the price of local manufacture versus the cost of opportunity lost in importing cheaply from China.
Yeah, in the previous episode, we, the essence of that episode was price. We mentioned these two in passing, but we'll dwell a little more on this now. The argument that there should be economic value addition in the country, even if at a certain price, is obviously a very sound argument. No quarrels with that. We should be proud of a manufacturing ecosystem coming up here. It is happening in a very large way, very welcome thing. But the other point about weaning ourselves away from China, by the way, we are still talking only of solar here. We are not talking of other products. That's a little questionable. The logic there is not so very sound, because no matter what, you will still continue to import something or the other from China. Because if you stop importing cells, you will still have to import wafers. If you manufacture wafer yourself, you'll still import polysilicon and so on and so forth. Even if you were to manufacture everything here, you still have to go to China for the machinery for making this. Of course, it is possible to buy this machinery elsewhere, but China is the cheapest and the best here. So you can't really so easily wean yourself away from China as things stand today.
So as things stand is something you said, and that's a very intriguing and revealing phrase. So what can and must India do in order to achieve self-reliance when it comes to manufacturing in the solar ecosystem?
See, we need a completely different manufacturing framework. If we continue to manufacture solar product the same way as we do, as I just mentioned, it's impossible for us to get away from dependence on China. But with the investments in R&D, with technological breakthrough, we can be on our own, we can be at par with China, or even get better than China. It's possible. But, as some expert pointed out, it is meaningless to continue to do the same thing and expect different results.
Okay. So you seem to hint that technology is the way forward for India that
exactly
can help us achieve self-reliance. So what areas within the ecosystem must India focus on? What is it that we can do with regard to technology?
Yes. Today's solar manufacturing technology, as we discussed at length in our previous video, starts with polysilicon and goes to ingots and wafers, and then wafers are sliced into cells, and then cells are made into modules. But then it is possible to bring in process automation, process improvements in technology, achieve breakthrough there, and thereby achieve lower costs. It is also possible to look at completely different solar products. I will list out some of the interesting technology areas of research, of potential breakthrough, which are being attempted in the country today. So one good possibility is perovskite solar cells. Silicon cells are approaching their practical efficiency limits, but perovskites promise efficiency exceeding 30%, in fact sometimes even as high as 35% in tandem with silicon. You have a perovskite cell and a silicon cell in tandem, linked to each other. While this requires a lot less energy to manufacture. Efficiency is high, the manufacturing process is also less energy intensive. By the way, India has already excellent academic groups working on perovskites. Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, IIT Bombay, there is a professor of the name of Dinesh Kabra. I would encourage viewers to take a look at his work. We have written about his work, and other papers also have. Very, very interesting, cutting-edge technology work that Professor Kabra is doing. A lot of work is happening on perovskites in IIT Madras, IIT Kanpur, practically all IITs, and then this Hyderabad-based RC, which is a CSIR laboratory. But the problem is a lot of work is happening, but all the work has still remained at the lab scale. You need R&D backing to intensify research here, and also to make the transition from labs to the market. And then you have work going on in tandem cells, thin film technology. It's another very interesting area. By the way, there is a company called First Solar, which is an American company. And they have pretty recently, like 2 years ago, set up a plant near Chennai, not far from where we are sitting, to make solar modules with this thin film technology. Basically, it uses this chemical combination, cadmium telluride. There are other combinations too. There are several, we don't need to get into it now. Thin film technology is basically a completely different way of manufacturing solar products, which is basically it's almost like giving a coat of these chemicals, semiconducting chemicals, on a glass substrate. I'm oversimplifying it, but that's the idea. Imagine it to be like a sheet of glass on which you paint this semiconducting chemicals. In this case, in the case of First Solar, is cadmium telluride. A lot of research can go on in this. By the way, this First Solar does not import anything from China. Now, if you want complete Atmanirbharata, if you want solar modules which are completely domestically made, one can look at thin film technology here. Everything is made here. But globally, thin film has about maybe 3-4% of the global solar market. And in India, it's not very different, probably even lesser. I'm saying thin film is another area where a lot of research work can happen, should happen. Okay. And then you have HAT technology, heterojunction tandem cells. By the way, Reliance Industries has put up a solar module manufacturing plant with this technology. Another interesting area of research is what is called copper metallization. You see, today, you will be aware, and we also mentioned this in passing, what is the difference between wafers and cells? You take wafers and then you draw lines, which are actually wires, conducting wires on them, and then the wafers become cells. What are these wires made of? They are made of silver. The cells manufacturer consume a lot of silver. Now, we all know that copper is as good a electricity conducting material as silver is. Then why don't you use copper here? That is because copper has other problems, It kind of diffuses into the silicon and then it creates problems. Silver doesn't do that. Here is another area. What can we do in order to be able to use copper instead of silver? This is an area of research. If we do that, and if we start manufacturing it ourselves, we are going to be cheaper. This is the way to go about it. And then there are other areas like silver-free contacts. and better encapsulation material. Some of these are not basic science, some of these are not radically different ways of manufacture, but these are process improvements that can bring down costs. Now there is a lot of R&D work that can happen in each of these areas, and taken together, they can take our country past China, if you please.
So it's fascinating you dwell on some of these technologies. I'm tempted to come back and do another episode just on the
Yes.
science and the technology behind the ecosystem.
Yeah.
But if we have to return to the commercial
Yes, we
aspect.
will do a video on these another day.
Awesome. If we have to return to the commercial aspect of this ecosystem, Ramesh, the way you put it, I am tempted to argue that R&D in the solar ecosystem is being underfunded in India. Would I be accurate?
Yes. Oh yes. I may not have numbers immediately with me, but I am willing to put my neck out and say that solar R&D in India is grossly underfunded, way inadequate, way less than what is necessary. I'll explain why. Here are some proxies for illustrating that solar R&D is still underfunded in India. MNRE says, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy website, it says 111 crores were spent on R&D in the last 9 years since 2017. And by the way, this is for all renewable energy, not just solar. Now, I don't know the numbers for solar separately, but whatever it is going to be embarrassingly small. Of course, there are other schemes like this ANRF, Anusandhan National Research Foundation, and there are several other schemes that government runs under which some funding happens. But even if you look at the totality, a sum of all these things, the amount of funding that goes for backing basic public funded research in for solar, very, very small. We cannot get very far with this level of funding.
Oh yes, it does seem that R&D funding is minuscule considering our aspirations for the ecosystem.
Absolutely.
So, but you also in your earlier answer you said that we must look at R&D. So obviously there's funding required, and if you're looking at public funding, where will the government find the resources for this?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, and that is really the nub of this video. Now, in the previous video, we showed that the country is losing in terms of opportunity cost several lakhs of crores because we are not importing cheaper from China and making it all by ourselves. That was indeed to lay the ground for the argument that I'm going to make now. Where do you find funds for R&D is your question, right? A lot of solar products, solar cells and modules, mainly cells, are still being imported from China for non-DCR projects. DCR is domestic content requirement, where by government mandate you necessarily must use locally made products. Now, there is a 20% basic customs duty on imported solar cells and modules. You would like to suggest the government can earmark a certain portion of the customs duty collected on imported solar cells and modules and earmark it exclusively for R&D projects.
So it's interesting, but I'm tempted to ask you, because this is one particular ecosystem or a sector, and then the imports is a certain portion of it. You mentioned a percentage, 40%. And then a certain percentage of customs duty to be levied on this. I mean, I would imagine it would be very small given, again, our ambitions, but do you have an idea of the absolute value of customs duty collected?
Yeah, you see, it's not very difficult to calculate on ballpark basis, a very broad basis. Now you see, in this current financial, let's take this current financial year for illustration. It is expected that India would set up something like 60 or 65 gigawatts of solar this year. Let's even take the lower number, 60 gigawatts. Now, as we mentioned in the previous video, CRISIL recently said that roughly 30-35 gigawatts
Yes.
could come with the DCR mandate, that is with a mandate that they should use only locally made products. So let us assume 30 gigawatts of capacity will come with locally manufactured products, that is cells and modules. So the other 30 gigawatts is coming from abroad. It is also fair to assume that all the 30 or at least almost all of the 30 gigawatts will be cells and not modules, because we have enough and more module manufacturing capacity already in India. So no point in bringing in modules. You can import cells and make modules here. So if you are importing 30 gigawatts of cells and you are paying 25% customs duty, it's not very difficult to make a ballpark calculation on the back of the envelope. And I did that and arrive at a figure of something like 7,000 to 7,500 crores.
Wow. That's significant.
Now, 7,500 crores. If we earmark a fourth of it, maybe 25% of it, or even 20% of it, we get something like 1,500 to 1,750 crores of rupees for funding R&D here. And by the way, this is annual, and this is for public funding. We would certainly expect the industry to do something on its own.
Sure.
Industry should chip in with its own R&D funds for higher TRLs. The public funding is typically for lower TRL, that is technology readiness level. Something like technology readiness level TRL 1 to 3 or 3 or 4. That is where publicly funded research happens. And then at TRL 3 or TRL 4, the industry takes it up and develops on it, gets it to marketing stage, which is TRL 9. So for this lower level TRL, which is really difficult for any industry to do. I mean, no company would really do any basic science research. That's all left to the institutions here, educational institutions. So this fund must go for that purpose, 1,500, 1,750 crores. On top of that, private sector companies should also invest and make this product market ready. So it is not inconceivable that we can lay our hands on funds sufficiently for backing R&D in solar.
So to sum up, I'm tempted again to ask you that this is the way to true and not pseudo self-reliance in the solar manufacturing ecosystem for India?
Yeah, I suppose some other expert could think of some other pathway, but clearly this is one way to get there. You can be completely self-reliant, not pseudo self-reliant, as you mentioned. Again, to sum up and give the very essence of this video, the only way to go about is through knowledge. We have to be a knowledge economy. We have to fund R&D, get our own products with our own material, and that is the way we can really wean ourselves from China. Not by forcing companies, industries, businesses to not import from anywhere, not China or any other place. That works for a temporary period of time. Over a period of time, the Indian industry should be able to stand on its own legs, and this is the way to go about it.
Ramesh, that was exhilarating speaking to you on this topic.
Thank you very
much. This was
much.
a continuation of our previous video, as we mentioned earlier. These were very insightful, and let's see how much more engaging we can get with our commentariat, as you refer to them.
I do hope that our perspective is properly taken.
Thank you.
I enjoyed talking to you. Thank you very much.